Okay, hello all. Thank you so much for your patience. We will be starting now after a little bit of technical issues. This meeting will be recorded just for training and education purposes, really. So thank you all for joining us. This is the first installment of having the conversation series, and we'll be focusing on managing mental health this evening. And this is about managing mental health when living in and serving predominantly South Asian communities. So before I really get into what exactly engagement looks like, I'd like to briefly talk about my role and my place in CASSA. And CASSA is the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians. So my name is Wardah Malik, and I'm the project coordinator of vaccine engagement here at CASSA. And what I do is I oversee the development of culturally specific and tailored messaging that we then can distribute to South Asians living in Toronto and help and guide them through this pandemic. And I also analyze the impacts and side effects that the pandemic has of the pandemic on South Asians in Toronto. And by looking at that, I really understand three main things: vaccine accessibility, vaccine hesitance, and vaccine confidence. And tonight's webinar also touches upon these three things, and it's hosted by both CASSA and the South Asian Vaccine Engagement Collaborative, or SAVEC for short. So this comes out of the general understanding that there's no one approach to vaccine engagement, and Toronto's diversity means that we also need diverse engagement strategies. So when we think about something like mental health, this means that we also have to consider the mainstream stories of mental health and how that differs in South Asian communities, maybe for the worse, and how culturally specific and culturally relevant messaging and understandings about mental health portray a more holistic image of what is going on in the community. And that's what we're talking about tonight. And moving forward, and the takeaway from this should be, how do I, as an outreach worker or someone who lives in a Toronto community, consider cultural implications of my work, and how do I then also include them when I do my outreach work? So a couple of housekeeping rules just before we start. This is so, this goes as smoothly as possible. Please have your camera and microphone off, and please use the chat to list questions. And please be respectful when asking questions. Before we kick off everything this evening, a land acknowledgement is necessary. So the work of the Council of Agencies Serving South Asian, or CASSA, takes place on traditional Indigenous territories of the Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and more recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit. This treaty is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Allied Nations to peaceably share and care for the resource around the Great Lakes. This territory is also covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. Today, Toronto, the traditional Mohawk name of this area called Toronto, which means a gathering place, and its surrounding areas are still home to the Indigenous people. And we are very grateful to have the opportunity to meet, work, and play on this territory as settlers. We wish to express gratitude to Mother Earth for its resources we are using, and honor all the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people who have been living on this land since time immemorial. Thank you so much. So with that said, I'd like to introduce our first speaker from Soch. Jasmeet Chagar is a registered nurse working in the field of mental health for almost a decade. She completed her Master's of Science in Nursing at McMaster University in 2021, where her thesis explored the perceptions of alcohol use among South Asian Punjabi affected family members, or AFMs for short, and their experience with problem drinking. Jasmeet co-founded Soch Mental Health, a community mental health promotion initiative aimed at providing the South Asian community with culturally and linguistically appropriate mental health support. Jasmeet, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Wardah. In order to screen share, there we go. We're all good. Everybody can see. Amazing.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Wardah, for the introduction. And to CASSA for even organizing this event. It's really needed in our community to talk about the mental health implications in general, but specifically on the South Asian community during the pandemic. So as you mentioned, with SOCH, so tonight I'm going to go a little bit into what SOCH is, the culturally specific trends that we saw during COVID-19, and then how we as a grassroots initiative responded to the needs of the community. So essentially, SOCH Mental Health is a health promotion initiative. So my best friend, Minnie Chahal, and I, we are both registered nurses. We co-founded SOCH in 2015. And in Hindi, Urdu, and Punjabi, as you may know, SOCH means to think or a thought. So our whole idea is to change our community's thinking or their SOCH about mental health, because as we can all appreciate, there is a vast amount of stigma related to mental health among the South Asian community. And in order to change our community's SOCH or their thinking, we do this through education, prevention, and building resiliency. So those are the three main pillars of our organization. So there are so many wonderful organizations focusing on direct service, and we definitely need that, but we wanted to focus on health promotion and a preventative approach, because you don't have to wait until something is wrong in order to learn about your mental health. So we want the average everyday individual to understand that mental health is an essential component of their overall well-being. And we achieve these three pillars of education, prevention, and building resiliency through community workshops. So previous to the pandemic, everything was in person, and we definitely had to pivot last year and make our workshops and events virtual, which has actually been really great because it's opened up a global platform, which I will share a little bit more about. We also have anti-stigma campaigns online. So we're very active on social media, and I'll share those links with you towards the end of this PowerPoint. So definitely on Instagram, you'll see us sharing tips. We'll do discussions in Punjabi and Hindi, definitely in English as well. And then we also use a lot of ethnic media outlets to get our message across to the community. So because Manita and I are Punjabi speaking, primarily we've been focusing on that demographic. As we can all understand, the South Asian community is not homogenous. There's so many different layers to the different cultures and the subgroups, and you have to start somewhere. So we started with Punjabi, primarily because we speak the language, we belong to the culture, and we live in the region of Peel, which has a large Punjabi subgroup. So going on different TV outlets, radio, we even have our own TV show with the Sikh channel called Apni Soch, Our Thinking. So our whole idea was, this started before the pandemic, so not everybody can come out to a workshop in person. There might be stigma, you don't want to come out, and it's harder for 50 and older, the parents' generation, the grandparents' generation, to even want to come out to these things. So we were like, you know what, everybody watches TV. We're going to get the message into your home through the TV. So that's also been something I think that is really important when working with the South Asian community, is that creative lens. You really have to think outside of the box when working with the South Asian community. And I think that's one of the reasons that SOCH has been very successful in our health promotion initiative. So when it comes to the pandemic, last year, we saw that there was an increased amount of mental health inquiries that we were getting. So a lot of individuals were messaging us. What we saw was that individuals that already had mental health issues, they may have found that these concerns were exacerbated because of the pandemic. And then on the other hand, we had individuals that may never have considered mental health to be an essential component of their well-being. And now, because of all of the changes, working from home, isolation, just fear in general, anxiousness, a lot of people were starting to have concerns with their mental health. So they didn't really know where to go, what to do. So we were getting a lot of inquiries on how can I cope with the pandemic? How do I adjust to life, working from home, balancing work and working from home with a South Asian family. And we also found that there was a lack of culturally and linguistically specific COVID-related resources. So I see that the South Asian COVID Task Force is also going to be presenting tonight. So they've definitely done such a great job at addressing that gap that we were also getting a lot of inquiries about. There was also a lack of culturally, linguistically specific mental health supports for the community, and then a lack of recreational activities. So overall, we would say that Soch was seeing a lot of substance-related issues, grief, because a lot of individuals in the community didn't know how to deal with this newfound way of grieving. How do you have funerals when there's only an X amount of people? And as well as adjustment, like I was saying, how do you adjust to this global pandemic? So those were the three main areas or topics I would say that we were seeing a lot of. And the way that we responded, so the first thing was in 2020, so from August 2020 to March 2021, we got the Canadian Red Cross grant. And through this, we were actually able to create 10 mental health streams specifically for South Asians. So I've listed them here. We have a women's group, a South Asian men's group, South Asian seniors group, child and youth mental health, an addictions team, queer and trans mental health. Gulabbi Harf is our poetry and mental health stream. Soneti Soch is for South Asian women 50 and over. We have perinatal mental health and international students. So we were able to create these streams with 44 volunteers that either have lived experience with mental health or have some sort of clinical background. And every month they have been organizing discussions virtually for our community, either in English or in Punjabi or Hindi. And we actually have a digital impact report that you can access online on our website, which I'll give to you at the end. And it actually outlines specific details about how successful we were with this Canadian Red Cross grant. So as you can see, we were able to reach over 53,000 South Asians through a virtual platform. And that's not just in Canada, it's been global. So that's kind of been one benefit of switching to a virtual platform, is that we've been able to access a global South Asian community. And finally, most recently, we applied for the Canada Summer Jobs Grant. So since July 5th until the end of July, so July 30th, we are running 4 weeks of recreational activities for South Asians. So the Canadian Red Cross was the first time that we had done something like this in terms of dividing our work up into different mental health avenues. And when we applied for the Canada Summer Jobs Grant, we realized that we needed to focus on recreation, especially because during the winter months, a lot of South Asians are cooped up at home. Obviously, everybody is cooped up at home, but we were thinking about the elders. They had nowhere to go, so which is why we wanted to focus on recreation. So right now, our activities are focused on children, youth, adults, and seniors. And we've been doing workshops or recreational programming virtually in English, Punjabi, Hindi, Urdu, and Gujarati, because one of our new employees speaks Gujarati as well. So that's something new for us as well. And we've been using the 4 domains or the 5 domains of recreation, which are spiritual and emotional, intellectual, physical, and social. So it's a wide range of activities that we have been doing. So these are just some examples. Like we've had like a dance class, like a henna or a mehndi class. We've done like word games for children, knitting for adults, like how to make a fulkari. So really trying to incorporate that cultural essence into these activities. And you can visit our website for more information, because these activities are still going on. They're free for the community. So I'd really encourage you to check out our website, which is sochmentalhealth.com. Share it with the community, because you never know, somebody in the community that you know, whether it's your family or friends, whether it's children or even seniors, they might actually find these workshops and these activities to be quite engaging. And my last message, based on what Wardah was saying, is like, how can we, incorporate culture into our practice? Sorry, it's been a long day. I've been talking. My throat is just messed up now. I would say to be curious when you're working with the community, because mental health is holistic. It's not just looking at the physical and what is impacting this person's mental well-being from a cognitive aspect, but it's holistic in the sense that like their culture matters, their language matters. Are they able to connect with you as a worker based on your interests in their personal life? And the last part is to just ask how someone wants their culture to be incorporated into their mental health care, whether it's their treatment, their medication, their recreation, how they want to be viewed from a cultural lens. It's very important. And the change actually starts with you. So before changing our community's soch, we have to change our soch about how we view mental health. So please visit our website. And if you have any questions, you can send us an email and I'll also put that into the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jasmeet. That was brilliantly done. And it really does start with us when we address mental health, and we have to break down the stigma within ourselves before we look outwards. So thank you for that. So moving on to our second speaker, Amit is a physician with a background in public health and artificial intelligence. He was a co-founder with the South Asian COVID Task Force and helped develop the national This Is Our Shot campaign targeting vaccine hesitancy. The campaign has worked with the likes of Justin Trudeau, Ryan Reynolds, and Olympia, Clara Hughes, and Haley Wickenheiser. The task force has been working with CASSA and has recently secured funding from the Public Health Agency of Canada to provide additional service to the South Asian community. Welcome, Amrit, and you have the floor.
Thanks, guys. I'm just going to find the correct screen to share. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Wardah, you can see the presentation. Okay, perfect.
Perfect, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for including us in this talk. I really, I just want to say I really loved Soch's presentation. It was really, really good, and I don't know, I really couldn't say anything. I don't want to use the word better, but what was suggested at the end is, I think, bang on, especially what we're seeing clinically. So what I thought I would just do is talk about who we are and really where do we go from here, right? So the South Asian COVID Task Force was created by physicians who work in South Asian communities, who essentially saw that our communities had much higher rates of COVID than other communities, and it didn't really make a lot of sense to us. And we started looking at what kind of public health messaging was set up, what kind of public health resources were available, and we saw major discrepancies in our communities versus other communities. A simple example I can give you is that we had less testing sites, and the testing hours were ridiculous. They were hours where did not suit the community. They were not open 5 days a week or 7 days a week. They were weird at days like Monday and a Thursday, which makes no sense during a pandemic. And so we had to work feverishly and aggressively to change how services and resources were being delivered. And that's not an easy task because you're going up against government in a pandemic. We produced, culturally and language appropriate messaging. We set up vaccination sites, we set up testing sites, and so forth. And then we helped develop This Is Our Shot, which is the shirt that I'm wearing right now, which is a national campaign around vaccine hesitancy. We partnered with a lot of traditional minority vulnerable groups, including the Canadian Muslim COVID Task Force, the Black Physicians of Canada, CASSA, the Latin American Task Force, as well as Indigenous populations as well. The campaign is delivered in multiple forms using multiple mediums. So probably the most widespread is a commercial that was played during Stanley Cup playoffs, which was put together by Facebook and some bigger sponsors. We do regular live town halls, which are targeted at the communities which I just spoke about, speaking about the topics, the questions, the language, the culture that's appropriate to that population. And of course, we have billboards and we do messaging and all the other more traditional forms as well. And so I really think that we played a small part in reducing transmission, improving hesitancy, and ultimately, as a result, reducing hospitalization. But does that equate to wellness? And I think that is really the question that we are now facing as we come out from the pandemic. And much again to Soch's credit, they spoke about this. And what I thought I would do was I took a look at what I see in practice, and what other physicians and other reports are mentioning on the South Asian population. And so there's these two Toronto-based pediatricians, Dr. Bai and Dr. Minhas, and they work with the South Asian population, and specifically with children. And what they've noticed is that the South Asian children are essentially in crisis, and they use the word crisis in the report. And again, this came up in Soch's presentation, but these are really because of pre-existing structural disparities. And what that means is the effects of families having insecure income, food insecurity, parents working transient and precarious jobs, all really lead to these obstacles that families have to go through. And those are compounded during a pandemic. And children often, are missing school, they're in isolation, they're not getting the same kind of resources and life that they had before. And it's more pronounced in the South Asian population than other populations. And then there's this, variant that's come along that's become our dominant variant. And unfortunately, there is a racial component to it, and it's been dubbed the Indian variant. And so they also talked about fueling a racist rhetoric that our children are facing in school. So children definitely seem to be facing more crises in their lives, and not surprisingly, we know that adults are also going through major changes as well. So this is now from Stats Canada, and what they found is that South Asians are reporting lower levels of mental health than any other visible minority during the pandemic. And it's somewhat or much worse mental health since physical distancing began, which I think really speaks to our culture when it comes to, human connection, family, and so forth. Now, it's gotten so bad that our population are reporting symptoms that are consistent with moderate or severe general anxiety disorder, which is a classified mental health disorder where when it's a severe disorder, it's now interfering and causing dysfunction in your life. So sleep, work, your relationships. Imagine now your anxiety getting so bad that it's affecting every component of your life. Well, it's really that's what's happening in our population. And again, the StatCan report spoke about financial insecurity, which we kind of put together during the South Asian COVID task force, because this was a population that were doing the essential low-paying jobs. What I thought was very interesting and kind of cool was that there's this student who recognized this in BC, and she was an international student. She is an international student. And she was talking about here that how important it is to take care of their own mental health, her own mental health. And when she got to Canada, the language barriers, the cultural barriers, and the stigma prevented her from getting the resources that she needed for her own care. And so what she did, her name is Yashmeet Kaur, she actually started a opioid awareness group in BC for students, because during the pandemic, and I think Soch also covered this in one of the slides, that substance abuse is becoming a major problem. And I thought this was such a heroic kind of effort where she acknowledged her own issues and then took it a step further to create a grassroots organization around something that is, has tremendous stigma and is a very difficult thing to treat. And she saw the lack of resources and barriers that probably the most vulnerable people in our population were facing. So we've covered Ontario, which was the pediatrics, BC, and now, not surprisingly, in Alberta, they're finding the same thing. What's interesting in Alberta is South Asians are reaching out for mental health help, but due to language barriers, stigma, and of course cultural barriers, it's still not anywhere near enough. And the stigma is what's coming up again and again in my review, which is this quote, I think, really nicely sums it up. It's always been an issue. Some things are just not spoken about. If you're going through mental health issues and depression, you look down upon low standards, which is not right. And that's really powerful because, we know that people are now facing general anxiety disorder, a severe form of general anxiety disorder, and very few people are able to come out of that without any sort of professional help. So what came to me was actually, everything that Soch was talking about. I could not agree with more. It's really about, I would add acknowledging the incredible stigma and barriers that exist, but engaging and kind of putting the individual at the center of their care. What's unfortunate is that, it seems that a lot of the work has to be grassroots in order it to be done in our population. What the good news is, I think, is that we have a lot of dedicated people who are educated, professional, and we know how to access grants for funding. And I think that's, the way it's going to be. And so moving forward, I think, the effects of the pandemic are unfortunately here to stay for a long time. And the mental health issues are, the way mental health works, I feel, is that it's very quick to come on, but very long to come off. And I think our population is going to be dealing with this for a very long time. But again, all the work we're doing really matters. And I'm very, very grateful to be part of it.
Thank you, Amrit. I completely agree. Getting rid of mental health and overcoming the issues that come with mental health takes a while. It's something that needs to be worked on consistently and can only be done really through grassroots efforts. So thank you so much for highlighting that point. Our final speaker is Harmeet Hami, and she's a case manager for the Mental Health Short-Term Emergency Diversions Program. She's completed her studies in the fields of social service work diploma, Police Foundations Diploma, and Early Childhood Education Diploma. She's been in the social work field for over 10 years. Harpreet has a collective experience working with clients who have mental health concerns, substance abuse, domestic violence, and behavioral issues. She's a member of the Ontario College of Social Work and Social Service Workers. Thank you so much for joining us, Harpreet. You have the floor.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so you can all see the screen as well? Okay, so I work with Punjabi Community Health Services as a mental health case manager with the Instead program. And I'm just here to talk a little bit about what mental health is within the South Asian community. And so mental health, just basically the definition of mental health, that it's the well-being of an individual and how it affects how we think, we feel, and we act, and also helps determine how we handle stress related to others and make choices. And that's how we kind of make choices, basically, right? So exploring mental health in the South Asian community, the stigmatized nature surrounding mental illnesses has made it challenging for a lot of South Asian men and women, basically to access the required aid that they need due to the socialization of sharing their emotions and even their personal life histories. And it often, a lot of these stresses arise from the generational trauma, or it could be cultural conflict, academic, work pressure, relationships and finances, family difficulties, and just arising things that kind of become an issue in their daily life. And become an issue to kind of really talk about it because of the stigma that's behind it, related to our community and related to the idea that mental health is not really talked about. There's not much of an awareness about it. So there's a lot of barriers, or some barriers that we've come up with that are experienced to access mental health services with our South Asian community. So there's a systematic barrier. So when it comes to the lack of South Asian mental health professionals, it's really about, you know, how many South Asian professionals are out there that are that speak the language, you know, understand the culture and understand the upbringing of a lot of our even youth or children. And even as we become adults here, we're still connected to our culture very deeply in that sense too. So there's also long wait times when it comes to other resources in the community. Sometimes that alone becomes a barrier, or fees when it comes to services that aren't covered by OHIP, for example. For some communities, or in general, some clients or patients, it becomes the issue about being able to access their medication because of financial issues, or being able to apply for any type of resources like ODSP, because and now, especially with students that come in and we've seen a rise in numbers when it comes to students in the mental health, or they've been diagnosed with mental illnesses and not being able to afford their medication, and then not being able to apply for any financial support just because of how they've come here and maybe things that are happening back home. Sorry. And then the lack of consideration and knowledge of religion and other social factors that affect mental health. So again, it kind of ties up with having lack of South Asian mental health professionals in the community too. So again, not understanding or not knowing where it could be related to religion, it could be related to social factors, it could be related to the cultural conflict happening within the family or the home, that also becomes a barrier. And then the family barriers, the stigma around mental health. So again, in South Asian community, it's not really talked about. There's not much awareness about it. There's a lot of tradition around mental health. So sometimes what happens is mental health kind of gets seen as like black magic, or this person has been possessed, just because of that's the type of things that a lot of our older generations have learned from back home. So them not being or understanding what it is like now, or actually understanding what scientifically mental health is, becomes a barrier. And then the responsibilities, again, coming down to finances or parental. So even being a caregiver can be overwhelming for somebody who has a mental illness or has been diagnosed with, or having to take care of someone and having that responsibility. And the lack of role modeling of health, help-seeking behavior in the family. So again, it just comes down to how much knowledge the family alone has about mental health in general, right? So it's important to create that awareness about it. And the stigmas and how to overcome that come as a community. So it starts with mental illnesses being due to supernatural causes. So going back to what I mentioned before about a lot of families or a lot of people in our community, or even other communities, you'd be surprised, that really see things as black magic or being possessed. So it's about educating the family on the scientific reasons and the causes of what that mental illness could be, right? And then mental illness is being shameful, for example, cultural expectations and reputation. So spreading more awareness of psychological disorders and how and dealing with it with some sensitivity, right? So you still want to use the right terminology at times when you're speaking to the community about mental illness. You know, if someone's labeling someone as crazy, you want to correct them if you are able to do that, right? And again, it's about knowing and creating that awareness and educating people as much as you can, and how it affects shameful, like the shame behind it. So also talking about that with families as well, that, you know, they're not alone. There are many people that go through this. And there's no such thing as, I mean, there's really no definition of what normal is, right? If you really look at it. And so, I mean, when even for myself, when talking to clients or talking to family members, you know, I do remind them that everybody still has a little bit of anxiety in them. And it's okay to have a bit of anxiety. It only becomes a problem when, for example, it's affecting you every day or in your daily life, and then you're not able to do things or being able to manage it is when it becomes an issue, right? And that's where you need that professional support and help. And that there shouldn't be any shame attached to it, because at the end of the day, as individuals, we all have some type of anxiety. And it's just, for some of us, it's easier to manage, or we've learned to manage it. We learn strategies on our own at times. But for some of us, it may not be that case, and that's okay, right? So again, just having that conversation, even within just your own family or with your own friends and your own group, social groups as well. And sorry, keeps moving for me, but it should be kept quiet and not talked about with others. So this is something really, really big that becomes a stigma in the family, especially when it comes to youth and children, you know, but have more of an open conversation and be honest about it with your, you know, even with your parents. When it comes to, like, for example, myself being born and raised here, I always have conversations with my parents and my family, and I have children too. So I definitely have conversations with them as well about these things. And even community leaders, that this awareness needs to be made. There needs to be more, you know, resources for these things, and less barriers when it even comes to, you know, less wait lines, wait list for a lot of the services as well, because that alone becomes the barrier. And then advocating for who, you know, because we're struggling to talk about their mental illness, or them alone when they're talking about their mental illness. So if you have to, be that advocate for them, right? Create that awareness for them as much as you can. So cultural awareness and competency. So what's needed is to educate yourself on the issue as well, right? So there's huge increase on rates of depression and anxiety and suicide, especially like mentioned before about the pandemic alone, and this COVID part of coming in, everybody being home, not being able to do much but stay home has become, you know, an increase in depression and anxiety. There's been a raise in suicide, but it's really, really important to educate yourself as well, that you're able to educate others. There's been this worsening underlying of illnesses that within the community. So sometimes with families, because they have no education alone, or they're afraid to talk about it because they're afraid of what somebody else may think, becomes a barrier. And it's important to bring it out culturally as well, that this happens in every community, not just our community, right? And again, they're not alone in this. And how can they seek that help? How can they get that support? What resources are out there, at least, that they can, you know, start to connect with, so that they can get that support? And what are some of the challenges? So a person with depression is often dismissed as just playing the victim. So a lot of this happens usually with the age group when it comes to youth, just because they're also vulnerable at an age where they can be triggered with a mental illness up to the age of 35. So they're in this age group where a lot of their behavior also gets dismissed because they're still growing. They're learning a lot about themselves. They're learning a lot about what's out in the community, about their friends, about their family, that they, you know, when they're showing their signs and symptoms, sometimes because, again, the education and the awareness isn't there within the family, a lot of people start to see it as just this person playing it as a victim, or that this is just a behavioral thing. It's not really anything related to mental health. And it could just be the beginning stages, right? That you want to kind of catch on to, versus especially when you catch youth sitting in their room alone all the time, or all of a sudden this change of not wanting to go out and see their friends, not spending some family time, and changes in their behavior, maybe related to anger, related to getting frustrated. And a lot of our families sometimes forget to talk about these things. We forget to stop and ask questions related to that. And I think it's really, really important to do that as well. So someone And then someone with anxiety or stress is seen as a weak mind. So again, we need to start changing the way we use our terminology or the way we think in order this awareness to be created, right? And again, it starts with ourselves, right? So just a scenario, and just to kind of get everybody to something to think about and kind of see what they would do if they were in this situation. So for example, this is Meet Guggen. So Guggen's 29-year-old female who recently lost her father. Although it has been several months, she is not able to get past her grief. She reaches out to a mental health team at PCHS for support because her family is not emotionally available. She enters the office crying uncomfortably, saying she needs help. The caseworker is busy with another client, and when Guggen enters the room, however, a student volunteer immediately attends to the client and introduces herself, asking the name of the client. The client proceeds to introduce themselves and talks about what they are experiencing. How can the volunteer attend to the client's needs, and what are the right steps to proceed? Right, so just something to think about. If anyone would like to kind of come up with what they would do or how they would support this client. Let's say if you were a volunteer or student and you were in this situation, what would you do to support this person? It's just a conversation maybe we can quickly have, or if you would write it into the chat, that's absolutely fine too. But is there anything anybody would like to share? So in this case, like I would say what the volunteer or the student volunteer would probably do is kind of validate the client's feelings and try to understand what her grief is about. She obviously has lost her father. She obviously is going through a lot. Has there been any underlying issues related to that? What does she miss about her father? And what can she do to kind of move forward? And what goals or strategies can she set? Or what other resources are out in the community where she can reach out to so that she can talk about her grief, right? So there's a lot of group programs. There's one-on-one sessions that she can attend to as well. And again, if it's related to culture, we at PCHS do brief grief counseling, not in depth, but more just brief, but just giving the client an opportunity to come in and talk about what their concerns and issues are. And grief can also relate to something like depression and anxiety. So this person may be very close to her family member that she's just lost, or a loved one that, it's taking her a lot of time to kind of move forward. So it's not something that you would say she has to get over or she has to forget, but it's about moving forward. It's about that it obviously will always be a part of her. This was her father, and she may have been very close to him. And she, that could be that one person that she always had support from for a lot of things. So you want to validate around that. You want to talk about what she can do to kind of, move forward so that she doesn't fall into that category of depression or develop any signs and symptoms of depression. So building resilience within the South Asian community. So the South Asian community is well known for projecting relentless work ethic and strong drive to assimilate. It is a cultural group that is celebrated to high intelligence, adaptability, and resilience, right? So we're known to be well educated, we work hard, we are very rooted with our culture. And as a community and leaders, we must build awareness and educate and support those that are in need, right? Sometimes we alone we have to start as the advocate. And sometimes that starts within our family or with our friends group. It could be related to our children, it could be related to a relative, it could be related to a friend. So advocate more openly and help normalize mental illness, right? Again, there is no definition for normal, right? We don't know what normal really is nowadays. So again, a lot of these things, we have to remind people that mental illness is there and it's real, and there is support and there is, ways to help manage that. And sometimes a lot of us just need that support and help. De-escalating a crisis or conflict. So basically you want to be listening to what the issues are and the person's concerns. So you want to be offering reflective comments to show that you have heard what their concerns are, waiting until the person has released their frustration and explained how they are feeling. You want to be focused on the resolution. You want to build their confidence and resilience. Really, the goal is to decrease their emotional and physical mental stress and levels of the situation using verbal and non-verbal de-escalation techniques, right? So when we're in a situation where somebody, again, it can be a family member, somebody close to you, where there could be a crisis or a conflict, as a person, this is where you can start. This is your beginning, where you can start creating that awareness by being able to listen, by being able to offer that support, and focusing on what the resolution could be and building their confidence, right? So letting them know that there is support, even professionally, that they can get as well out in the community. So this is kind of a model that that I kind of looked into. So it's calm, assess, and facilitate. So you want to decrease the emotional and behavior and mental intensity of a situation. You want to be able to assess. So determine the most appropriate response as presented by the facts, right? So again, scientifically, what is really there? What are the facts in the situation? And facilitate. So to promote the most appropriate resolution based on an assessment of facts that are presented. Right? So the presented issues, facts, what are you going to do with them? How can you help this individual? How can you support them so they can further get or help that they need or further be connected to other resources? So this is another scenario. So this is Biljit. He's 45 years old and he participates in the peer support group every Saturday. Biljit was diagnosed with bipolar disorder a year ago, but has never experienced any manic episodes while attending one of the peer support groups. While Biljit was going to take his seat, the caseworker noticed some signs of agitation and seemed distracted when she was greeting him. As Biljit sat down, he began whispering to himself and talking unusually. The caseworker approaches Biljit, and Biljit got up out of his seat and began pacing around. He begins speaking out loud as the caseworker approached him. What can the caseworker do to help Biljit? So it's kind of going back to the slide before. So you want to validate, you want to see what this person, what could be their frustration? Maybe in this moment, he could be having some type of hallucination. He could just be hearing voices. He could be, in a situation where he may just need to let some frustration out. So sometimes it's okay to stop and listen and kind of validate around what his safety concern could be as well as yours, right? And again, there's this stigma against when it comes to safety. I want to actually touch on that a little bit, is that there's this stigma about safety that when it comes to people with mental illness, they can be very harmful, or they could hurt you, or they could harm you. But you'd be surprised with statistics that people with mental illnesses are probably the least person to ever harm anyone. Okay. It has to be very, very severe mental illness or some type of mania where it happened in an episode. But again, it could be related to a trigger, but very, very rarely will someone ever hurt you, and again, it's how they're labeled. They are not crazy. Something like mental illness, it's something medical, right? And I think, again, it has to be the education and awareness made around that as well. So any questions or questions and answers? Anything anybody would like to share? Anything anybody would like to mention?
If not, then I can say I'll monitor the chat, but I think we can move on to scenarios.
Okay.
So because you're here and you're such a great resource to have with us here, I've combed through kind of the feedback that our ambassadors and volunteers have been getting from the field. And I think it's important we look at that, the phrases that have been most often repeated, and see how we can, formulate the appropriate response so that
Absolutely.
it's sensitive, so that it regards culture, and so that it gets straight to the point and
Mhm.
really addresses what you have been talking about, which is you're not in harm and people are not crazy, right? They have
Yes.
rational fears, and we
Yes.
just have to de-escalate that and address it
Absolutely.
properly.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to screen share it right now, and we can get that on its way. Share. Okay, so as I said before, I've looked at and I've talked to our volunteers, and there's two major categories we have here, which is one of hostile feedback and aggressive body language. So when a volunteer goes to the door, if they're doing door by door, or if they're doing online places, or if they're holding a pop-up event, these are the phrases they often hear, which is one, who are you to tell me what to do? In a very aggressive body language. Second, this virus will go away on its own, so that I know better than you kind of stance. And this recall or remember AstraZeneca, how do I know you guys are not trying to harm me? There's not enough information. So that's our first category, which we see kind of a combative tone. And then our second is nervous feedback and a more inward or shy body language, which is I'll wait and see, and I will probably take it next year. So there's this kind of like hypothetical promise, or like a fictional promise made to say that I'll get it, but there's just, you know, a little bit nervous on really getting to the root of it. This other one is, what's the worst that could happen if one person doesn't get vaccinated? So throwing that rhetorical question out there just to, you know, intimidate, or, you know, but because it is coming from a place of, you know, nervousness. And then the last one is, my family members got really sick. I don't want to have a similar experience. So this fear of one's safety and one's health, especially when it comes to something such as getting vaccinated. So I'll leave these up and you can go through them on how we would address them really. And I'll be taking notes if that's okay.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. So starting with the de-escalation. So basically when it comes to somebody with mental illness, it's about how you build that rapport with the person in the initial visit, right? So when they've come in, it's how you kind of greet them, how you see them, how you talk to them. Your body language sometimes alone can become kind of like a signal for them that, you know, if this person is, you know, who is this person, how you've approached this person, basically, right? So for example, if somebody comes to there, and now we don't even know what their mental illness may have been, right? They may not even have just, obviously they've not disclosed it, but they could have just walked in, and your way of, you know, you can be as polite as possible. Sometimes it's just, and media plays a role. Okay, so media plays that role of, you know, they've been updating the community on what these vaccines are. They've been updating, talking about how it's affecting people, and even in general, word of mouth, how people are talking about it as well. So there's this sense of paranoia to it too, right?
For sure.
That paranoia about, okay, again, if you got sick and I'm going to get sick, what could happen then, right? If you got sick, I could probably get more sick. And especially if they have a mental illness, then definitely that, you know, not definitely, but if there is some paranoia in it, that paranoia is kind of shoot up now.
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
So now they're even more paranoid about it. And yes, working with a lot of clients in the mental health field, as a case manager, I do come across this as well. And again, it's just validating with them. It's talking to them about how this can just, yes, there are signs where they can get sick, but they possibly may not. Not everybody will get sick. So it's kind of having that conversation around it with them. And again, it's how you have that conversation, what your body language is like, right? And how your voice, tone of voice is sounding.
I know with the work that we're doing, we're noticing a lot of like paranoia is stemming from misinformation within the South Asian community. So I'm wondering, is there a specific de-escalation kind of approach for South Asians? Is there something that we can, you know, do to make like that initial meeting with someone who's from South Asian background even more, you know, seamless, or is that a myth? What do you think?
Maybe what you could try is when somebody is approaching to get, and sorry, I'm just gonna say because I'm trying to understand as well. So is this happening when people are coming in for their vaccines?
No, like, so if
Oh,
people
sorry.
are doing outreach work, like door to
Okay.
door, so like, for
Yes.
example, you open the door and it's someone who's South Asian and you're also South Asian, and is
Yes.
there a specific way to, bridge that gap, that cultural gap? Is there a respectful way to do that? Is there a meaningful way to address that?
Again, I think it honestly, it just comes down to your tone of voice. If you can speak Punjabi or Hindi, the language they're speaking, sometimes that's very
It
useful,
helps, yeah.
right? It kind of helps break that one barrier that, okay, this person speaks my language. And maybe if I have questions now and I want to make an understanding with them, I'm understanding the language and they're understanding me. And again, your body language, right? So have that confidence in yourself too when you're talking about it. And at the end of the day, you're making the best awareness you can. There's no real way to do it, and then there's no way not to do it. There's that in between where it's how you present it as a person, right? If I approach someone at the door and say, hi, Sasika, I'm here to talk about this vaccine, and it's very important that you get it. These are the reasons. Yes, I understand you have these questions related to people getting sick, and yes, some have been getting sick, and we come to know that they've had a fever, but not everybody has had that symptom. So it doesn't have to be that you will too, and that's my part of just educating you, and then kind of leave it at that, just so that you're agreeing, but also not disagreeing with them, right?
Exactly.
Because you have to remember, they also watch the news, they watch what's going on out there, they're listening to their neighbors, listening to their family, relatives, their friends. And I think have to be realistic about it as well, right? So if they're saying that, people are getting sick, why should I get it? You have to be honest, say, yes, people are getting sick when they do take the second dose, and they get sick, but then at the end of the day, it's kind of like a day or two they get sick, but they get better.
Yeah.
And then there are people that haven't gotten sick at all, right? And of course, there's still ongoing research. It's just more to protect yourself from the second variant, so that it does, you don't get caught in that, and so forth, something like that, right? So it depends how you kind of educated yourself to educate them.
Yeah, I agree. It's about framing and positionality when you approach someone, regardless of culture, regardless of background, just
absolutely
on a one-to-one human connection.
Yes. And I think you're doing the best you can. But yes, language, I think, makes a huge, huge difference, even for myself, like being in this field for so long.
Yeah.
Just even meeting someone in the office or out in the community or hospital, the minute, even though they see that I am from the South Asian community, and let's say they are speaking Punjabi, or even happy that I can speak Hindi, they're like, okay, now I can talk to you.
Yeah,
now
there's a bit of trust and comfort.
One barrier kind of moves on, and then they can kind of get more comfortable. And sometimes engaging them into like just a general conversation about how they're doing, how things are going in general, what they're doing to, help themselves with this pandemic, so that they're not like, now that resources are starting to open up, things are starting to open up, or even if there's still some barriers, are they going out for daily walks? So what are they doing to kind of help themselves throughout this time? And then maybe engaging them into this conversation rather than having it right away.
That's a great point, to kind of give a buffer and to actually, form
so and that's the rapport building part.
Yeah.
So you're introducing yourself, you're letting them know where you're from, and then you're kind of letting them know, okay, like, asking them how they are, what they're doing. So not jumping right into the whole situation or the whole, like educating them on that one thing, and then you're kind of like talking about, okay, so by the way, this is why I'm here. This is why I've come by. I'd just like to give you some awareness on this, and this is A, B, C, and D.
Yeah,
right?
perfect.
So I think that's the most you could do. I mean, at the end of the day, if they're holding on to things like they'll wait and see what will probably happen next year, at the end of the day, it's not something that's in their control. Same thing with mental health patients. Like, we really want to support them and help them, sometimes become their own barrier when it comes to taking their own medication. So, I mean, there's so much we can do as workers as well. And there's so much you can do as ambassadors as well, right?
Yeah.
Just having that education and knowledge.
Exactly.
Just making
And
that awareness.
so for the empathetic outreach, I know we talked about de-escalation and the nervous feedback. So I'll wait and see. And I know you said that this is stuff that's out of your control because these are people's, it's an individual choice. Is there
Yes.
something you would advise against doing or saying that would immediately put people off of this idea? Or is there a way not to approach it?
Sorry, say that again. So you want to,
Is there a way not to approach it? Like, please do not do this. Like, especially taking into account that it's someone's individual choice. You don't want to be too, assertive when making
oh, of
this
course.
argument, right?
And again, I think it's just your own way of saying it. It's how you put it out there. And it's not that please don't do this. It's more of, these are your options and your rights. And, it's good to have it because of A, B, and C.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think it's just kind of following through that versus, you should get it or you shouldn't get it. If you get into the should and could with them, then it's just becoming this whole ball of a conversation that sometimes gets out of hand. So I think it's more just laying out, this is what, I've built that report with this person. Now I'm going to kind of let them know that, this is why I'm here. And it's important to get your, vaccine, or it's important to do this or this. And then you just list it out that way, right?
Yeah.
What the importance is behind it.
Yeah, no, I really like this point of don't get into the should and could, because you're not there to debate or discuss. You're there to educate and inform.
And sometimes you just got to listen.
Yes, perfect. Yes.
Right. Sometimes they're just, again, it could just be the frustration, right? They keep hearing different stories. They don't know what the truth is. Again, you're not, and again, a lot of people like to believe that if you're not the doctor, why are you telling me?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, okay, I've done my part. And yes, you'll meet people that will say, yes, this is great information. Thank you. And then you'll meet the people that want to get in an argument. And I'm sure you can sense it. And that's where you kind of say, okay, well, you know what? I've come here to kind of let you know, this is what I wanted to say. This is the information I wanted to provide with, but I hope you do look into it and, have a great day.
Yeah. And it's as simple as that. And
Yes.
Sometimes it's not your job to go above and beyond.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because sometimes when you get into that, it may, like, again, even as a worker, I could be working with this client for almost like a couple of months, and there'll be things they may say that I just kind of let over the head.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I've come to know that right now, maybe not the time where they'll understand it. And me trying to make them understand is not going to work. So I'd rather make my focus about educating them what they need to know, and then later maybe going back to it. Right? Because then it's like you're just banging your head in a wall. Right? And it's just where people sometimes are just, this is what I believe and this is what I want to believe. And that's okay too.
That's okay too. Exactly. The difference of opinion should be,
Absolutely.
Validated as well.
Absolutely. Yes.
And with that, I think unless there's a few questions in the chat, no, I've checked already. But other than that, I think we're good to wrap up. Thank you so much, Harpreet. Thank you to all of our speakers. Hopefully this gets people talking and considering what it means to have culturally relevant approaches to outreach.
Yes.
I hope to have more discussions like this. It's great to have them. And
of course.
Yeah, and I want to open it to the wider audience, get more people involved, and it should be a really good time. And especially when looking at long-term effects, I know Amrit mentioned this as well, like long-term effects of this pandemic, and especially as it relates to mental health.
Yes.
So thank you everyone for attending, and thank you to our speakers. Have a lovely rest of your day. And with that,
Thank you.
bye.
Bye. Take care.